May 1944. The English countryside hums with the sound of warbirds. Above the mist and hedgerows, the sky belongs to men like Captain Clarence Bud Anderson, a young fighter pilot flying a machine that would soon become legend, the P-51 Mustang, Old Crow. He's just earned his 5th kill, officially an ace, but there's no time for celebration. Not when the biggest gamble of the war is about to begin. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. The turning point of World War II. Every pilot in the 357th Fighter Group knows what's at stake. Their job? Keep the bombers alive, no matter what. Because every fortress that makes it through means fewer American boys dying on the beaches below. But the skies over Europe are hell. The Luftwaffe isn't beaten yet. They're striking wolf packs, hundreds of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs diving head-on through the bomber streams, guns blazing, engines screaming. As Bud later wrote, "We were outnumbered more often than not. But what mattered wasn't who had more fighters, it was who had more guts when the tracers started flying." By this stage of the war, Germany's once mighty air force was cracking. Some of their pilots were just boys, barely 60 hours in the air before being thrown into combat. But mixed among them were the veterans, the Red Baron types, cold, ruthless, born killers in the sky. And when you met one of them in combat, you didn't know who he was until the fight was over. One of you burning through the clouds, the other heading home. For Bud Anderson, that day would come on May 27th, 1944. A duel so fierce, so personal, that even 80 years later, pilots still whisper about it. It wasn't just another dogfight. It was a knife fight in the clouds between two men who refused to die, and two machines built for the same purpose, to rule the sky. The sky over Europe, a blur of silver and smoke. It's May 27th, 1944. Captain Bud Anderson and his squadron have just linked up with the bombers when the radio explodes with chaos. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Blue leader,
I'm hit.
break
Take
left.
fire.
Red one,
He's coming around on you.
you've got one on your tail. Static. Shouts. The sky suddenly feels alive and deadly. Normally the Luftwaffe would avoid the Mustangs, preferring to strike the bombers, big, slow targets that couldn't fight back. But not today. Today the hunters were hunting the hunters. Anderson Banks' Old Crow, hard left. His flight follows. The sun flashes off their canopies like sparks in a forge. Bogey, 5 o'clock high, 4 black dots, 4 Messerschmitts, and they're coming fast. The two flights meet head-on in a brutal turning fight. 4 P-51 seconds against 4 Bf-109 seconds. Altitude bleeding away, G-forces crushing ribs, tracers slicing the air. At first, the Germans hold the high ground. But the Mustang's secret weapon isn't its guns, it's the way she dances. A tighter turn, a quicker roll. In seconds, the advantage flips. The German leader senses it, breaks formation, levels out, and guns it, trying to escape. But Bud isn't letting go. "Eddie, take the right pair. I've got the stragglers." Old Crow drops in behind a fleeing 109. Bud squeezes the trigger. 50 caliber rounds tear through the sky. White smoke bursts from the enemy's fuselage. The Messerschmitt flips onto its back, hanging there upside down for a heartbeat, almost graceful, before Bud fires again. The enemy spirals toward the clouds below. Kill number 6. Gun camera footage from that day still shows the chase, the Mustang steady. the tracers glowing like molten steel. But there's no time to breathe. 2 more Germans ahead. Bud can see their wings twitch. They've spotted him. One dives to escape, but the leader climbs straight into the Sunday. A challenge. This isn't some rookie. This one's dangerous. Bud pushes the throttle forward. All right, let's dance. The 2 fighters carve white scars across the sky, looping, rolling, climbing, until the world beneath them turns into a blue haze. Anderson overshoots, climbs to avoid losing speed, but the 109 reverses its turn, crawling up behind him. He's on Bud's tail now, close enough that Bud can see the flash of the German's canopy. I'm out of tricks, Bud remembers thinking. Nowhere to go but up. He pulls. Hard. Old Crow groans, the stick shaking in his hands. The altimeter spins. Airspeed drops. Both planes are gasping for lift, hanging in the air like 2 boxers on their last breath. And then it happens. The Messerschmitt shudders. Its nose dips. The German stalls, a second before Bud does. Old Crow lurches, drops her nose, and Anderson dives after his enemy. The fight not over, just flipped upside down. 6 miles up, both planes fall like stones through the thin, cold air. The German recovers first, pulls level, tries to climb again, desperate to reset the fight. But Bud's already made up his mind. This ends now. He eases the throttle, drops 10 degrees of flaps, and throws the Mustang into a gut-wrenching turn, tighter, sharper, inside the enemy's curve. The gamble pays off. Bud's nose comes around, guns square on target. The German realizes, too late. He pulls up, hanging on his prop, a perfect silhouette against the sky. Bud squeezes the trigger. Tracers cut through the air like lightning. The Messerschmitt bursts into smoke, tumbling, falling, breaking apart in slow motion through Bud's gun camera lens. Kill number 7. In the silence that follows, Anderson exhales for the first time in minutes. Somewhere below, the wreckage burns into the earth, and above it, Old Crow banks toward the setting Sunday. For Bud, it wasn't just another victory. It was survival, carved in gunpowder and faith in a machine that refused to quit. The sky is thin and silent now, 6 miles above the earth, 2 men hanging on the edge of the impossible. Bud Anderson has no more cards to play. He's out of altitude, out of options, and nearly out of luck. I probably won't make it home, he thinks, but he's not done yet. He eases the throttle back, drops 10 degrees of flaps, and yanks the stick with everything he's got. The Mustang groans, metal flexing, wings trembling. The nose creeps up, inch by inch. Come on, girl, come on. And then she does. Old Crow swings inside the German's turn. Bud's crosshairs slide over the Messerschmitt silhouette. He can almost see the German's head turn, realizing too late what's about to happen. Hot damn, I've got him. But the German refuses to quit. He shoves the throttle forward, prop roaring, and pulls straight up, vertical, clawing for the heavens like he can outrun fate itself. Bud follows, full power. The 2 machines climb, slower, slower, until they're nearly standing on their tails. Now it's a contest of nerve and gravity. Who stalls first, dies. Anderson has already tested this theory once today. He knows the limits of his Mustang, knows how far she can hang before the wings give up. The 109 shudders. Just a twitch at first. Then the nose drops. That's it. Bud squeezes the trigger. The 50 cars bark in unison, a chorus of thunder in thin air. Tracers streak upward, carving orange ribbons through the sky. The rounds find their mark, hammering into the 109's fuselage. Gun camera footage from that day shows it like a dream. The Messerschmitt, hanging weightless, smoke erupting from its belly as the Mustang rides up beside it, calm and steady, the Hunter closing in, and then the 109 falls. A silent, spiraling dive, 20,000 feet straight down until it vanishes in a bloom of fire on the earth below. Bud exhales. Kill number 7. But he knows it could have gone the other way just as easily. That German, whoever he was, had been one hell of a pilot. Maybe the best Anderson ever faced. It wasn't just man against man up there. It was machine against machine. And on that day, the Mustang won. As the sun sinks behind the clouds, the sky burns gold. Old Crow hums softly, the smell of cordite still lingering in the cockpit. Bud Anderson is alive. And that's victory enough. 3 days pass. May 30th, 1944. Same sky, same war, different story. This time, Bud and his squadron are flying escort over Germany when they spot a swarm of 109 seconds forming up to strike the bombers. The Mustangs dive, sunlight flashing off their wings like blades. Bud locks onto a trailing 109 and opens fire. But almost instantly, the German panics, breaks formation, and drops away in a desperate dive. Maybe his leader ordered him to pull the Mustangs off the bombers. Or maybe he just froze. Either way, Bud can tell. This kid isn't an ace. He's barely trained. Poor bastard, Bud mutters. The German keeps diving. 25,000 feet, 20,000, 15,000, until there's nowhere left to go. Bud holds back, waiting for him to level out. But the rookie doesn't. In a tragic twist of instinct, the young pilot pushes forward on the stick while craning his neck to look behind. The nose dips just a little too far, and in the next heartbeat he slams into the ground. No shots fired, no glory, just a puff of fire on the far side of a German field. Bud circles once, silent. He'll later remember seeing a farmer on a horse-drawn wagon, turning his head just as the plane hit, the explosion bursting across the road, chunks of flaming wreckage tumbling past the terrified animal. Even now, decades later, Bud could still see that man's face. A mix of fear, shock, and the quiet understanding that death had passed within arm's reach. War was like that. One moment fury, the next, silence. And in that silence, Bud Anderson carried both the pride of survival and the weight of what it cost. The rookie 109 dove hard, desperate, reckless, slicing through the clouds in a vertical plunge that looked more like panic than tactics. 25,000 feet, 20,000, 15, 10. By the time he leveled out, he'd already run out of sky. Bud eased Old Crow in behind, lining up the shot, his crosshairs steady, finger brushing the trigger. But before he could fire, the fight ended itself. The German, probably terrified and craning his neck to look behind, made one fatal mistake. He pushed the stick forward just a little too far. The nose dipped, and in an instant, the 109 slammed into the earth, full throttle, full speed, exploding in a fireball that shook the countryside. Bud didn't fire a single round, but the gun camera kept rolling, capturing the black smoke curling up from a burning field, silent proof of his 8th confirmed kill. And yet, that's not what Bud remembered most. It wasn't the victory, or the wreckage, or the score. It was the man on the ground. He would later write about it in haunting detail. There was a farmer driving a horse and wagon down a dirt road, Right to left across my view, the fighter hit the ground just behind him. The fireball leapt across the road where the wagon had been seconds before. The horse reared up, pawing at the air. I can still see that farmer's face, frozen in shock. It was a moment suspended in time, war colliding with ordinary life. A young German who never had a chance, a farmer who almost died without ever knowing why, and an American pilot watching it all unfold from 6,000 feet above, powerless to stop it. Bud would later say it played back in his mind like slow-motion film, frame by frame, forever burned into memory. The enemy fighter, the exploding field, the terrified horse, a snapshot of chaos no victory could ever wash away. When Old Crow finally touched down back in England, Anderson had chalked up another kill. But his expression wasn't one of triumph, more like quiet disbelief, the kind you see on a man who understands the fine line between skill and luck, life and death. Still, the war wasn't waiting for reflection. Something bigger was coming. In early June, the 357th Fighter Group was grounded. Mechanics moved through the rows of Mustangs, painting thick black and white stripes across their wings. Invasion stripes, the sign that the storm was about to break. D-Day was coming, and soon Bud Anderson and Old Crow would trade the high-altitude duels of the sky for something far grittier, the low, violent chaos of strafing runs over Normandy, where the war was no longer thousands of feet below, but right there in front of them. June 1944. France burns below. The beaches are chaos, ships, smoke, fire, and courage all tangled into one thunderous storm called D-Day. High above it all, Bud Anderson and the Yoxford Boys of the 357th Fighter Group fly low over enemy territory, trading the glory of dogfights for the dirty work of survival. No longer guardians of the bombers, now they're hunters, dive bombing, strafing, blasting anything with a swastika on it. Every convoy, every truck, every German tank that moved across Normandy, the Mustangs were there, painting black scars across the French countryside to pave the way for the boys on the ground. You can still see the gun camera footage. Old Crow sweeping down like a hawk. 50 caliber tracers carving through trees and smoke, explosions blooming where German supply lines once stood. It wasn't glamorous work. It was gritty, relentless, necessary. And though Bud did his duty, deep down, the fighter pilot in him still hungered for what he was built for, a real duel in the sky. That chance came on June 29th, 1944. The air was clear and cold at 25,000 feet when Anderson's flight spotted movement below. A gaggle of Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds, sleek and deadly, slipping beneath the bombers. Unfortunately for the Germans, they had no idea who was above them. Bud rolled Old Crow over, nose down, throttles wide open. The world blurred into motion, blue, white, green, until he lined up the lead 190 square in his sights. The Mustang shuddered as 6 Brownings opened fire. Perfect hit. The German's canopy popped, his chute blossomed, 1 kill. The formation below shattered in panic. Bud picked out another. The 190 dove into a cloud bank, desperate to vanish. But the clouds that day were thin, ghostly curtains of vapor, and Anderson knew it. I could see him moving through the mist, he'd later recall. So I slid underneath, waited, and when he broke out, I was right there. At point-blank range, Old Crow's guns roared again. The German tried to bail, canopy off, body half out, but then flames burst from the cockpit. He fell back inside. The 190 rolled over and went down in a pillar of smoke. Kill number 2. With his ammo running low, Bud spotted one last Fokker wolf limping away. He dove again, closing in until the black cross filled his sights. A short burst, the 190 erupted. The pilot never got out. 3 kills in a single mission. By the time Bud's wheels touched English soil, his tally stood at 11 confirmed victories. A double ace. His best day in the war so far. 1 week later, on July 7th, Bud claimed another 109. Likely another green kid thrown into a fight he couldn't win. That brought his total to 12. But victory had a bitter-sweet edge. That same day, his wingman and closest friend, Eddie Simpson, scored a kill of his own. They'd flown together since the early days. Eddie, Bud, and Jim Browning, 3 brothers bound by the sky. So when Bud finally reached 300 combat hours, the first of the originals to finish his tour, it wasn't celebration that filled the airbase, it was silence. A mix of pride, relief, and the quiet ache of men who knew that in this war, every goodbye could be the last one. After months in the air, dodging flak, outmaneuvering Messerschmitts, and watching friends fall from the sky, Captain Bud Anderson finally set foot on American soil. The war was still raging across the Atlantic, but for the first time in years, he could breathe. No oxygen mask, no cockpit, just air, warm and free. Back home, people treated him like a hero, a real-life hotshot, the boy from California who became a double ace, the pilot of the legendary Old Crow. But the thing about war is, it doesn't stay overseas. It follows you. It calls your name when the crowd stops cheering. And 2 weeks later, it called Bud back. A telegram. His best friend, Eddie Simpson, was gone. Eddie's squadron had been ambushed over France. He managed to bail out after colliding midair with another Mustang, parachuting into the countryside alive. But 4 days later, German soldiers found him. They didn't take him prisoner. They shot him where he stood. Bud never talked much about what he felt that day. He didn't have to. When he stepped back aboard the ship to England, heading into his second combat tour, he wasn't just returning to war. He was going back to settle something deep inside. England again. November 1944. But this time, Bud had a new bird. The P-51 Mustang. The newest, deadliest model on the front. 6 Browning 50 caliber guns. A sleek bubble canopy with an endless field of view. He wasted no time painting the name on her nose, Old Crow. His first mission back was a wild one. November 27th, 1944. The Luftwaffe was bleeding, but far from beaten. If anything, they were meaner, cornered animals defending their homeland. The 8th Air Force wanted to draw them out. So, they tried something crazy. No bombers, just hundreds of Mustangs flying in a fake bomber box formation. Bait for the German fighters. It worked. Radar lit up across Germany like Christmas. More than 100 enemy fighters took off, believing they were about to rip apart another wave of B-17 seconds. But when they broke through the clouds, it wasn't bombers waiting for them. It was Mustangs, guns hot and hungry for a fight. The sky erupted. Dozens of dogfights broke out at once, silver and grey blurs twisting through sunlight and smoke. Bud spotted a Focke-Wulf 190 climbing out of the pack. He rolled in behind it, squeezed the trigger, and the German froze, wings drooping, propeller slowing, before spiraling away in silence. No time to watch. Another flash, another target. Bud pulled the trigger again, and a second 190 belched smoke and fell away. Still, the fight wasn't done. At lower altitude, he and his wingman caught sight of two more. 190 seconds. Only this time, they weren't attacking. They were running. Flaps down, landing gear half out. They were trying to get home. Bud Dove, ready to finish it. But just before he fired, both German pilots did something unexpected. They cut their engines, belly landed in a nearby field. A desperate, silent surrender to gravity itself. They'd rather crash their own planes than burn in midair. Bud held his fire, watched their fighters skid across the frozen ground, and pulled up. He didn't need another kill that day. He'd already seen enough death for one lifetime. That night, back at base, Bud scribbled in his logbook, 2 confirmed, maybe more. But numbers didn't matter anymore. Not since Eddie. Not since the war had stopped feeling like a scoreboard and started feeling like survival. He poured a drink, stared at the name painted on his Mustang, Old Crow, and whispered, "Let's keep 'em flying, Ed." Because from that night on, every time Bud Anderson climbed into that cockpit, he wasn't flying alone anymore. When the smoke cleared that day, the German skies had gone eerily still. The bait mission, the fake bomber formation of Mustangs, had worked almost too well. The Luftwaffe had thrown everything they had left into the fight and lost. When the final claims were sorted, Captain Bud Anderson walked away with 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable, bringing his total to 14. 1 short of the legendary triple ace mark, but fate wasn't finished with him yet. A week later, December 5th, 1944, Bud and his flight were flying over Germany when one of the pilots fell ill at high altitude. They dropped down to help, and right into the path of a squadron of Focke-Wulfs over Berlin. The fight that followed was fast, violent, and personal. And when it was over, Bud had downed 2 more enemy fighters right over the heart of Hitler's capital. 16 victories, triple ace +1. For the rest of the winter, the skies went quiet. Snow and fog grounded both sides. Bud Anderson, now Major Anderson, had flown 116 missions, scored 16¼ kills, and never once had to abort. Not a single mechanical failure, not a single hit from enemy fire. The man who'd spent years flirting with death had come home untouched, at least on the outside. But not everyone did. When Bud left Europe, one of the originals from his old squadron stayed behind, Jim Browning, another of his closest friends. In February of '45, Browning went up against 2 of Germany's newest weapons, the Me-262 jet fighters. Browning's leader shot one of the jets down. When he turned to look for Jim, he was gone. No parachute, no wreck, no radio call, just missing. For Bud, it was another empty chair, another brother lost to the clouds. After the war, Bud went home, married, and started a family. He named his son James Edward Anderson, a name that carried the memory of his 2 fallen friends, Eddie Simpson and Jim Browning. Decades later, that same son, Jim, traveled to Europe and found what was left of Browning's Mustang, confirming what Bud had always suspected. Jim had collided with one of the German jets in midair. 2 warriors, 2 generations apart, finally reunited through time and memory. Bud Anderson never stopped flying. He became a test pilot, pushing the limits of new aircraft for the U.S. Air Force, helping shape the future of American aviation. He retired in 1972, a living legend who'd seen war give way to the jet age. And then, in 2022, at 100 years old, the boy from California, who once fought for his life over Europe, received one final call sign. Brigadier General Bud Anderson, the last of the great World War II triple aces. Through his family, his words, and his book To Fly and Fight, the story of Old Crow still soars, a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's flying through it and coming home. The sky never forgets its heroes.